girls, and welcome to another episode of the Hey Girl podcast. In today's episode, you get to meet my dear friend, Emily Murphy. Emily is our very first real-life author who's agreed to come on and share her story. And girlfriends, you are going to love it. Emily and I met through my church years and years ago when they lived in this area as her husband was starting medical school. And it's just been an incredible gift to, even from a distance, watch how God has done just amazing things in her life, in Greg's life, as they moved from here. Greg continued through his residency and is now a doctor, as they had their two adorable kids. And as you're going to hear more about today, Emily fulfilling her dream of writing a book. And can I just say, I read it and I loved it. And that's a lot, because I want to say, I've admitted it on this podcast before, that I don't tend to be like a fiction book reader, but I got so sucked into her book, The Disappearances, and the story, and you need to pick it up and go buy the book, read it. Let me know what you think. I'm sure you will love it, especially if you're a fiction book reader anyways, but I'm just throwing it out there to people like me who don't read a lot of fiction. I still really enjoyed the book. And so I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I know I enjoyed just hearing from her and our conversation. And there were so many moments where I was like, yeah, this girl, this is why she's a writer, because the way that she words things. And there were moments where I just wanted to be taking notes because of just quotes from her and the wisdom that she pours out. And so without further ado, I hope you enjoy this episode with my friend, Emily Murphy. Hey girls, I am here with my dear friend, Emily Murphy. Emily, I'm so excited that you have finally come on the podcast. You faced your fears. Do you want to say hey to our listeners today?
Hey girls, I'm so happy to be here with you today. Bethany finally convinced me to come on.
Andy tells me that I have the power of manipulation, and I like to think that it comes in handy when recruiting podcast guests.
We're good.
So, Emily, you are my very first official author, and I just have to say, this makes me feel legit right now.
You're making me feel legit right now.
I'm sure we're going to get to the point where we talk about how you just released your first book. I have to say, I loved it. I pre-ordered. I was one of those people. But come on, like, when do your good friends like write books, release them, have like release parties at Barnes and Noble? It was a little bit of a dream for me come true. And I want to think that I would be totally honest even if I didn't like it. I don't know, because I didn't experience that to tell you what the other side would have been like. But I got totally sucked in to your book. The Disappearances is the name of the book. And I know I'm going to do a shout out right from the beginning. Girls, go get the book, okay? Buy it, read it, love it. And you tell me the genre, because I'm going to say it and then I'm going to be totally off base. Or maybe I can say, okay, so how about I try? And then
I really want to hear this. Let's go.
Okay, so I feel like it's young adult, historical fiction novel. Yes?
Yeah, I would call it young adult historical fantasy.
I was so close.
So that was a really good shot.
Oh, whatever it was good. And I'm super excited for your next book. No pressure. But let's back up, because we got a lot of listeners, never met you before. So, Emily, why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are and where you come from?
Okay, I would love to. Well, I was born in Evansville, Indiana, which is a smaller town in Indiana, and it's very southern. You can see Kentucky from over the Ohio River. I was the oldest. I have a brother and sister, and we lived in Evansville for like the first 7 years of my life, and then we actually ended up moving to Hong Kong for my dad's job. And I'm really curious to see how much of this you even remember about me. So we moved to Hong Kong for 2.5 years. At the time, it was still a British colony under British rule. It was just a really interesting way of growing up, moving around a lot. We did a lot of traveling. I met a wide range of people, went to an international school. And this was back in the early 90s, and so like the internet hadn't really taken off yet. So if you were going to communicate with people that you knew back home in the States, like you actually had to send them a letter or maybe a fax.
Wait, like a written letter?
All of a sudden, I feel so old now when I tell this story. But anyway, so I read a lot because there just wasn't that much else to do. So I really grew up just living in books, finding a home in books. I would spend most of the year in Asia, and then we would come back to Indiana for the summers. And that was my culture growing up. I lived Indiana, Hong Kong, Indiana. Then we moved to Tokyo when I was in 6th grade, and Indiana again after that. And so I'm what's called a third culture kid. Actually, I just listened to another one of your podcasts with a third culture kid.
Yes, McKella.
Yeah, McKella, that's exactly right. And so it was interesting to grow up that way because, half the year I was the girl from Indiana when I'm in Asia, and then when I'm in Indiana, I'm the girl from Asia. And so I definitely had my own culture that didn't really fit with a lot of other people, but it was the most wonderful experience to grow up overseas and sort of get to do that. And it really bonded me with my family. My parents and my younger siblings. I just felt like, we shared this experience that not many other people did. I have these like distinct memories of me and my little sister being totally jet lagged in Hong Kong and just staying up late, like braiding our Barbie's hair. Lots of little things like that. I was raised in the church. My parents definitely demonstrated the importance of being in the Word and prayer. And, I heard the gospel from a young age and grew up sort of believing that. I think I understood it. I didn't necessarily quite grasp how broken I was inside as a person. It still felt very much like focused on the externals and sort of like outward behavior, following the rules. Looking back, that's sort of what I think was going on in my head and my heart. I didn't know a lot of other people who sort of loved God or believed the way that my family did, at least in my schools or in my friend groups. So again, I was sort of kind of used to being the outsider in some ways. So I really feel like I sort of hit my stride as a person. When I was 15, I was living in Tokyo. We'd been there for a couple of years. I just felt like I had really good friends. Living in Tokyo at that time was just such a dream. I mean, you had so much freedom. You could just take the train. You didn't have to have your driver's license. You sort of had everything you could want. Nobody was really saying no a lot, which was a little dangerous as a high schooler. But finally, just after a lot of upheaval, I just really felt settled and happy. And my relationship with God was becoming sort of less important. And I think the Bible felt pretty dry to me at that point. But in some ways, I actually, as a person, felt like happier than I ever had. And so that was sort of interesting to me and sort of led me, I think, to question some things. But that was all about to change. My sister, who was 13 at the time and I was 15, started having a lot of mouth pain. And she would say, my jaw really hurts, and she wasn't eating very much. And so, my parents would take her to the dentist and they would say, well, we think she just needs braces. And so we would plan to do that when we were back in the States the next summer. But one day we were walking to the bus and she just started to cry, and she told me, like, I can't feel half of my face anymore. And so I came home that day and I passed that along to my mom, and, obviously something is very wrong. So they immediately booked tickets to take my sister home to Indiana to get looked at, and they actually found a very large tumor behind her eye that had grown so big it was like shorting out nerves in her face. And it had progressed to stage 4. So the outlook was not good. So in the span of like 24 hours, my whole life just went into this upheaval where my mom and sister did not come back. My dad and I sort of packed up the house and tried to tie up our loose ends of our life and moved to Indianapolis, where we had never lived before, so that my sister could get the best treatment that she could get at a children's hospital. That year, I basically felt like I lost my friends, my boyfriend. My family was just going through this really difficult time. I felt like everything that I believed, my faith structure just sort of was gone. It was really difficult starting high school in a new place and just going through this really traumatic experience and not knowing anyone at the same time. I sort of had this like pendulum where I'd definitely been this rule follower, sort of like terrified of stepping out of line, like, you know, do everything just so. And then it was like the pendulum almost like swung totally the other way, where I think it's easier sometimes to be hard-hearted than to be brokenhearted. And so that was me. For a year or two in high school, I was just looking for any bit of escape or happiness, sort of for the short term. And it's amazing looking back some of the choices I made in an effort to be happy, and that I actually thought that that would work. And so, I mean, I think when we're looking for like satisfaction and purpose and happiness in places other than God, they do sometimes feel good for the short term, but the problem is there's usually some sort of a hook in it that is hidden. So that was a really hard time, and there were some days when I just didn't know, if I could keep going, and it just felt like there wasn't a lot of beauty or hope or anything sort of left in the world during those years. I remember that I don't know if I ever completely gave up on God, but I was very angry with him. I remember, I was just, screaming at him one time to, make himself known to me. I would go to church. I would see people around me that were singing and, raising their arms, and they looked really into it, and I couldn't even bring myself to sing. I would read the Bible, and I would see things like David saying that he found the lost so beautiful, and that it was, sweeter than honeycomb to him. And I would see people around me just having these experiences, and part of me just felt very cynical, maybe what they're feeling doesn't even really exist, or maybe they just have an easy life, or they're faking, or whatever it is. But part of me also just still wanted that at the same time. I remember seeing this deaf man at the front of the church signing the hymns, and I just found that so beautiful, and I remember just wanting what he had. That was a really rough time. Looking back now, and I mean, it's been years, but I see still all of these little mercies along the way of God, planting little seeds, people who he placed in my path during that time. And it just felt like God was very patiently starting to lead me back to him over the years by just making me more and more hungry for him again. Which is always a mercy, if you're feeling that hunger for him, that's him, showing you. And so I don't really have one of those moments where it was just a conversion or anything like that. It was slow, and it was steady, and it was hours and hours of thinking and pondering and reading and listening to people and arguing and just asking myself, does this make sense? Is there a God? What is my purpose? And I do remember I went to this retreat right before I left for college, and just having almost this vision of a cliff, and just jump off that cliff and just fall. And this is the only thing that's ever going to actually catch you is God. I think up until that point, a lot of my life had been sort of holding on to this branch, just holding on. It's such a miserable way to live. You're over this cliff, holding on to a branch. And it was almost like someone stepping on each of my fingers until I let go.
Wow.
If you're looking at it from a certain perspective, it's wow, that's so mean. That's so mean to step on our fingers. But if you're going to let go and fall and feel like held and caught, that's actually a mercy, because that's a life holding onto that branch. So I also just remember this major shift in my thinking eventually, where I heard this sermon that talked about how maybe like the purpose and goal of our life isn't about happiness, but it's about our holiness. And that's really spoken to me. I've thought about it a lot over the years, because our circumstances can so easily change. Like, so much is out of our control. And maybe even when you're happy, maybe you're just worried that like you're about to lose it all anyway. When these horrible things come that really just throw us completely for a loop, like, what do we do with that? Like, do we just hold on and try to get to the next high point and like get out of that valley, and that's just the point of our life? I've started to like realize over those years that if my purpose is actually knowing God deeper and my own holiness and sanctification, then these periods actually have a purpose. They're really important. And I think you get to know people in a different way when you're walking with them through really dark places. So I went to college. I sort of was starting to dip my toe back into faith and exploring it. And I went to this Christian group when I was a freshman, and I was just like, these people are so weird. I know about this. And so I didn't go. And the really hilarious thing about that is that they ended up being some of my best friends who I still have. And one of them was Greg, who is now my husband. So just like, God has such a sense of humor, and I was being such a jerk.
Okay, so I have to say, first of all, what group?
It was Tufts Christian Fellowship. It was an InterVarsity group.
So I don't know if you listen, you're going to have to go back and hear Ashley's story, because she talks about her experience going to like a Christian group. Hers wasn't InterVarsity, but same thing. And hers was like, this is crazy.
I just people think about me all the time. I'm like, oh my gosh. But then we win them over, don't we?
Yes.
So anyway, that was just me being kind of a jerk, but God is merciful. And now I love these people. They're so wonderful. They're such a good part of my life. I would just say since then, it's just sort of been this awakening over years of just sort of learning again how to like fall in love with God and Jesus, not just knowing him or knowing about him, just really finding him beautiful. Like, I always wanted that. I wanted to look at the Bible, and I wanted to look at Jesus, and I wanted to feel that. I wanted to feel that he was beautiful. And I just finding him in these old stories in the Old Testament that I thought I knew so well has just been the joy, like such a joy in my life. It's almost kind of like those magic eyes where you're like looking at it, and then all of a sudden this like second picture like pops up, and you're like, now I can't unsee it. I feel very grateful again for that, because again, I just feel like that's God's mercy on me when I had walked away from him, and he just sort of steadily called me back. And just finding the world beautiful again, like those years when I just didn't find much in the world around me. Just starting to see like wonder and awe and beauty in the world again, and feeling gratitude in some ways instead of like entitlement. And I think it's funny because when I stopped making happiness sort of my goal in life and made it instead, getting to know God better, entitlement instead of gratitude, like holiness instead of happiness, that I became happier. Because I just think it's one of those things where you can't go straight at it. It's like that's a byproduct of other things, like doing what we're made to do, and it's byproduct. So this is by no means anything that is done in my life. It's still things that I'm working on. So I got married to my wonderful husband, who I met at Tufts, and he did 4 years of med school, 5 years of residency in Connecticut, and then we spent a year in San Francisco. And now we just moved to the St. Louis area this summer. We have 2 kids, and I had this very long-standing dream come true of seeing my book published this summer. And so that's sort of where I am. There were a lot of setbacks to get here, but it was really exciting to have that dream come true and see where we've sort of ended up right now.
I love that. A couple of things. Question number one, your sister.
Yes.
So, because I know that'll be hanging for the listeners.
Sister is miraculously doing very well. She is living in Indianapolis right now, and her recovery has been nothing short of miraculous. You know, we did chemo, radiation. She still does have some residual health issues, but she's been in remission for over 15 years, and it's truly miraculous what happened to her. So thank you, God, for that.
Amen. I just had to share that second half of the story because I'm like, it's incredible. So you had some like word moments in there. I loved your line where you said it's easier to be hard-hearted than broken-hearted. And man, that like totally just hit me from a lot of conversations I've been having recently, actually, is how people respond to hard things. And you saying it in that way, I'm like, this is so been on my heart recently, it's an easier decision because it self-protects, and versus having a broken heart or even just an open heart just feels so vulnerable, which as much as I value and talk about it all the time on this podcast, like vulnerability is hard stuff. Like opening yourself up.
I don't know. It just seems like, this, like even today, just like this year and just all the things that have happened in the world, it's courageous to keep a soft heart and to just keep hoping. I mean, sometimes that just feels like the bravest thing you can do is to just get up and keep hoping.
Absolutely. No, it's very true. And man, your journey from obviously all you shared from your childhood and your faith journey, but our paths crossed rather when you were living in this area in Hopkinton, and you and Greg were very newly married, and he was at the beginning of, he was in med school still?
Yes.
Yes.
Long journey, yes.
Which is crazy because now I'm like, he's a doctor. What in the world?
It happened.
You're like all of my dream friendship scenarios in one. Like you're an author, like you wrote and released a book, and then like Greg is my friend that legit like became a real doctor.
Yes, the road was very long for both of those things. God got us here. We finally have sort of reached this next stage, which is exciting. And it's kind of strange because we're finally here in Missouri. We're going to put down roots, as far as we know. We're going to be here sort of indefinitely. And that's never happened to me before. I've never had this like end date of like, okay, in this year I'm going to be moving away. It's wonderful and it's kind of scary at the same time because it's like, this actually, might be permanent.
Yeah, because even when we were friends, that was one of the things we always knew is this is going to be temporary, like not our friendship, but our close proximity.
Yes, exactly.
Well, tell me a little, I know small pieces, but this journey, because we kind of went and fast forward, but you just mentioned it briefly, but those are all big things. Like you're talking about a husband in med school, residency, which anyone who has any familiarity with that life, long hours, crazy, crazy schedule. You're young and married. You're working on a book, but then throw kids into the mix, throw a couple of moves into that.
Yeah.
Tell me maybe just some moments throughout there. What was that journey as far as some of the things that were hard, but also ways that God just showed up and sustained, as you said, like just carried you through a season where honestly, like there are a lot of people, either one of those journeys, becoming a doctor, writing a book, any moving, that those experiences can be crushing or just be things that they never really got to walk all the way through. And now you've done all of them simultaneously.
So I would say definitely the 5 years of residency were challenging. And we had heard that going into it, that, it's very long hours, and we somehow ended up having a child. Our first child was born July 5th, and Greg started his 5-year residency on July 1st. We basically did both, started residency and parenthood in the same week.
I'd like to explain to you how that happened, but I feel like he's a doctor, so he could probably explain that.
We just decided to do it all. I sort of was a little concerned when we would mention that to like doctors, like my OB or whatever, and they would laugh. And I was like, well, that can't be a good sign.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, those were some really long years where, Greg is trying to learn all these things, and with really big consequences too. I mean, these are things where if you're not focused and you're not learning, then, that has very serious consequences for other people and their lives and their health and their families. So that's an immense amount of pressure for him to be under. And we have 2 little children at home, and I'm trying to pursue this dream that I've always had of writing a book, which is a very long process as well, and fraught with a lot of rejection. Long process of trying to get an agent to represent you, and then the agent will take it to the editors at the publishing house, and they will hopefully make an offer. But this is years and years of writing and rewriting and revising and realizing that it's still not quite there yet, and then getting no's from agents who, aren't even going to read past the first page after you've spent several years working on this, because they're very busy as well. So there were a couple of years in there where, I have these young babies at home, and my husband is very busy and not around a lot. And I'm just hearing no over and over again to this dream that I had. And I think that was another really trying season. But the difference was at this time I was actually trying to walk with the Lord, and it was really amazing because I felt him so much during that time. That, like, looking back, I feel like that was when he has felt the most real to me. I started doing a Bible study, and I was in the Word every day, and I could just feel myself growing. Even when I felt so empty in some ways, that I was just completely poured out with my kids and pouring myself into this book that I was trying to write that wasn't really going anywhere. I could feel myself growing in this way, this like fruit of the Spirit way, where you're like, okay, that's not me. That is something else that is coming in and doing that work inside of me. And I just feel like my faith grew so much during that time. And I also had this friend, a girl who I met the first day that I went to this church, and she had just moved as well. Her name was Sarah Dell, and she lived down the street from me, and her husband was also a doctor. And she was such a wonderful, dear friend to me. Like, I still choke up thinking about her. She would come over and just keep me company, and she would organize my pantry, which was a disaster. She would just encourage me and sort of just be there to preach the gospel to me again and again. And that's another friend that I've had to say goodbye to, and she lives in Seattle now. She was just such a shining light in my life during that time. And that was just, I felt like that was just another one of God's mercies, where I look back and I'm like, he put that person in my life. And she came and picked up some of this burden that I had, and she just helped me get through it. And I just feel like that there are some people that are just like Jesus with, skin on, here in your life. So I'm just really grateful to her. And if she ever listens to this, Sarah, thank you so much.
We're going to have to tag her.
You're kidding.
I love that. And I just love the testimony of how God does. I feel like God could choose, and he does. He meets us in these hard places, and through his word, like you said, you're studying God's word, and his Spirit is doing a work. But I love how many testimonies that I hear from women of when in his kindness and in his grace, it's not even just always through his word. He sends these people, the right timing, all of these things into our life, and how they exemplify him. And just I love that description of Jesus with skin on. And I just think it's a good reminder for all of us, because we never know when, not just that God is sending those people, but that God's called us to be those people, that we are that person in someone's life. And what an incredible testimony and I really hope that she does listen and hears this.
And I feel like if I got to the end of my life and I could be that for one other person, that to me is more than being a doctor, more than being an author. Like that would be it for me. That would be the mark of a life well lived.
That's awesome. So 5 years, it was tough, but he got through residency. Out of curiosity, when did things turn as far as the book? Because you were describing, there was a lot of rejection in this process, and you kind of continued to move through. Because I'm thinking about women right now, and maybe it's not writing a book. Maybe it's just something in their life that God has put the stream on their heart, and they have been pursuing or taking steps, but they're in that season of where it just feels like rejection after rejection. What word would you have for them? Like, what did that look like, the turning point for you when it went from, okay, this really doesn't look like it's going anywhere, to starting to see the fruit of all of that persistence on your part and your faithfulness to just keep on?
Mm-hmm. I would say, over years, I was praying about this, and I was asking people close to me to pray about this. And there would be times where I would say, God, this doesn't seem to be going anywhere. You just want me. Not what you have for me. Like, do you want me to give this up? And I felt like he often does this in my life, where he will bring me to a place where I need to be able to say, I can put this on the altar and walk away. And that's for me. That's for my own heart, because then that's not my idol. That's not my whole life is not this thing. So I had to do that a couple of times along the road, where I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to step away from this for a little bit. I feel like if I'm supposed to come back to it, then I will. And I just always had this sense to come back to it. Like, it still brought me joy, even when it was like ripping my heart out. At the same time, I feel the most alive when I'm writing. It's like Chariots of Fire, I think, is the movie where Eric Liddell is like, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. Like, that's me when I'm writing. What I feel like I was made to do. And so I kept coming back to it. Like, sometimes God's no's are kind of subtle, but like, they were no's, like actual no's in my email from agents, like, no. So I just kept going and just reworking the manuscript over and over again and learning, because it wasn't ready at the beginning. It just wasn't ready. I still needed to grow as a writer. And eventually the answer was yes. There was an agent who just fell in love with the story. And even though it still wasn't quite there and needed work, he could see the potential in it and just fell in love with like the heart of the story. And I am so grateful. I've thought about this so many times. I am so grateful that other agents along the way said no, because the agent that I ended up with I adore him. He is just perfect for me. He's the perfect mix of like encouragement and pushing me to go further. Like, the book, The Disappearances, would not have been the book it is if it wasn't for him, because we changed a lot. Like, we reworked a whole lot of it. I can't say without giving away spoilers, but this partnership with this agent, he took this book to a level that it would not have been at. And so again, I just feel like when God is saying no to things in my life, he's not holding something back from me. He always has something better. It's usually not in my timing, it's always longer than I want it to be. Inevitably, when I look back, I am like, thank you for saying no when you did, because what you had was so much better than what, I might have settled for. So he said yes. And then that was another year or so of sort of retooling it and taking it out to the publishers, and it sold in 3 weeks to Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. And then it was another, few years until it's actually out on the shelf. So all told, the journey from me starting to seriously write it was probably 7 or 8 years. Yeah. And again, just working on, perseverance for me as a character trait and trust. And I see a lot of things. And one more thing I just want to add about that is if you read the book, I see things coming out of that experience I had as a teenager of, the book, The Disappearances, is about things disappearing from the world every 7 years. The scent of flowers, stars in the sky, the ability to dream, and the world just becoming less colorful and less beautiful and full of hope and wonder. And then after experiencing darkness in your life, steadily being able to find those things again. And so I just feel like in some ways I can see the experiences that I had as a young adult. I'm able to draw on those to write, to have written this book. And so when I see it that way, I actually do see God bringing beauty from ashes, like he promises to. And so that's really special.
I think that's incredibly powerful. Honestly, your description of even the season of rejection, and you described it, God bringing you to these moments of like putting this on the altar, like, are you willing to walk away? But not only that, like to me, I'm like, girl, that would be hard enough. This is this dream that really, it's the crazy thing to think about. God's put this dream on your heart, and then for him to ask you to put it on the altar. Talk about an Abraham, Isaac moment. Is like, here's the dream. Here's the gift that I've given you. Now, are you willing to sacrifice it? But even beyond that, for you to then, every time you pick it up, to the work that you put in and what you just described, like it wasn't ready and it still needed more work, and your willingness and perseverance, use the word perseverance. Heck yeah, girlfriend, you showed incredible perseverance, because from someone who really struggles with that, who wants instant results, and I want like, okay, if it's too much work, let's just do something else. You know what I mean? This is why I probably never complete a book. But I just think your story is I'm listening to it being so reminded that, to me, the things that are most beautiful in life are the ones that we are willing to stick with it and to continue to bring it before God, and not just lay it on the altar, but then pick it up and work at it and actually persevere when it's hard, when we're having fun, and then when we're not. Because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm assuming not all parts of writing a book are that much fun. And I just now getting to be on the other side and having read your book and seeing all these things, like going to the bookstore and getting to see you there with this line of people waiting for you to autograph their books, and thinking like, it is such a cool thing to be able to see the fruit of that. But then to know that God's still not done. Like, girl, he's continuing to work and continuing to write your story. And so in light of that, right now, like you described a little, you guys just moved, you're settling in, your husband is a doctor. Like, this is no longer preparation. This is the real deal now. What does it look like in your life right now to continue this journey with God? What's going on in this season of your life?
Well, I think definitely just sort of this shift in my thinking in terms of like, we might be here for decades. I've never really lived life that way. And so I think that's kind of terrifying in some sense, but I'm also really excited. It just feels great to be here and sort of figure out what that would look like to be friends and neighbors with the same people, 10, 15 years down the road. I think getting here and making friends has been a really big priority for us. Just getting plugged into a church, Bible study, and getting the kids in school has been important. And just sort of figuring out this new rhythm of our life with Greg having this real job. And personally, I am doing this podcast was good for me today because I am working on another book. It's not a sequel. It's a different, totally different story. But I am in the throes of that, like, needing that perseverance, like, pep talk again, because I've been working on it for a little while and I love it. And I'm really excited about it. But it's just not quite there yet. And so I'm doing the same process of like, God, like what do you have for me with this? Is this what you have for me right now or not? And, I can come to him with that. And obviously I'm hoping that his answer is yes, like this is what I have for you. And it's going to be wonderful. Everybody's going to love it. And it's going to be the best book anyone's ever read. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know what the future is going to hold. And so right now it looks like me getting my butt in the chair and doing the work and seeing what comes out and if people respond to it or not. And just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And if that's not what he has for me, then I am learning to trust that it is something better. If the answer is no, he has something else and it's going to be just exactly what I need at that time.
So what you're saying is you haven't just arrived and figured it out?
The rest of life is smooth sailing. It is all downhill from here. That's what I expect.
So it's going to seem like so trivial in light of all these things. But I do want to know, because writing involves a lot of like sitting in front of a screen and taking time to just focus on it. How do you, in the midst of this season, in the midst of writing and being a mom and, your husband's a doctor, how do you just care for yourself in that? What does Emily taking care of Emily look like?
That's a good question. I don't think I always do the greatest job. Like there are definitely things that go to the side when you're a mom of 2 young kids and you're trying to write a book when they're napping or when they're, in bed at night. And so I think there are definitely areas of improvement where in terms of like my personal health and working out and, things like that, learning to cook nutritious meals. These are some of my goals, life goals.
Me too.
Let's do it together. We did it for a while. We were like, when we were living in the same place, we were good at keeping each other accountable like that. But yeah, I'm in a season where there's just not enough hours in the day to have it all. And so I'm sort of picking and choosing. And I think sometimes I don't do a great job of taking care of myself and my health, which I know is probably true of a lot of women who are listening right now. With you, if you have a word for me or any encouragement, I will take it.
My word is, I was doing great when you lived here. It's all been a crapshoot since. You need to move back. That is my word.
Paul putting down roots in Missouri thing, actually.
I hear God calling you to Westboro.
I would come.
Oh, well, Emily, I love hearing your story and loved having you on and sharing about what God's doing. I do have one more question for you though, because if I don't ask it, then I'm going to get fired.
Okay.
And I can't afford to lose one more job right now, even if it doesn't pay me anything. But Emily, could you tell our listeners who are dying to know, what is the most superficial thing about you?
Oh, how much time do you have, friends? I would say so I have 2 goals in my life right now of things that I really want to learn. And the first is how to do my hair so it actually looks pretty, because I just feel like it's amazing the difference in my self-confidence. If someone else does my hair, I'm like, oh yeah, I can do anything because my hair looks good. That's really superficial. And I also really want to learn this is so embarrassing. I really want to learn how to make chicken in a good way, because I've been trying for probably a decade to make a good chicken breast, and it is just my spiritual gift. So those are the 2 things right now. I don't know.
I love that you listed making chicken as a spiritual gift.
Some people have it. I don't.
So what I need to do, listeners, I'm putting this call out there. If you have a fail-safe
yes.
recipe, you need to send it in.
And it has to be You guys, like, it has to be really straightforward because that's where I am in my cooking. 10 years in, that's where I am in my cooking.
I'm having so many memories of why we were just such great friends. All right, listeners, the challenge is out to you. We need hair tips and how to cook chicken for dummies like us. And we need it to be delicious. Well, Emily, thank you so much for coming on, for being a guest today, and just for sharing your heart. It was an encouragement to me. Even if I didn't even put it out there, it was worth it just to have this conversation. So
much for having me. I really loved it, and I hope it was helpful for somebody who's listening, even though I felt like it was a little bit stream of consciousness. But I love this podcast, and thank you so much for having me.
Aw, thank you. Okay, girls, that was my friend Emily. And days after sitting down and interviewing her, I'm still thinking about her words as she shared her story, but really just the work that God has done in her life. And honestly, I'm kind of a fangirl, and I love Emily, and we've been friends for years, but I just left that interview with so much admiration for the courage and perseverance that she has had over the last years. Because when we first became friends, it was back before kids, and when Greg was just starting medical school, and all of the things that she shared as far as since she's been married was ahead of her. And she was, in those moments, amazing to me, like incredibly amazing young woman. And now to hear the things that God has brought her through, what she's walked through, having 2 babies while your husband is in residency and doing insane hours, and just staying faithful in her journey, and then writing a book in the midst of that, the rejection she talked about facing from trying to get her book published. I am amazed and just reminded that when we give our all to Jesus, when we put it in his hands, whatever we have, even if we feel like it's just like we don't have much to offer, like the little boy when Jesus is feeding the 5,000, I was reminded in my quiet time today, like there were probably 10 to 15,000 people on that mountain. Like 5,000 was just the men. If you include all those women and children, the thousands upon thousands of people, there is no way that boy was the only one with food. But that boy was the only one willing to give everything he had, even though it seemed like so little, and put it in the hands of Jesus and watch Jesus take it and bless it, break it, and then multiply it. And I just look at Emily's life and how again and again she has just put everything in his hands. And she even described it with her book, the dream of writing a book and putting it back on the altar over and over. And then God taking that and all that he's done since. It's a challenge to me and a reminder to me of what all of our lives should look like. And so I pray, sisters, brothers, whoever is listening, that Emily's story today was an encouragement to you and a reminder of the incredible things that God is capable of doing in your life. You don't have to be a writer. You don't have to be a doctor. Whatever you have, if you're all in, if you give it all over to God, I promise you, he's going to bless it and break it, and he's going to multiply it, and he's going to do incredible things through your life. And not just Emily's life, but this podcast is an example of that. The fact that you are listening to this podcast, for me, is that multiplication, because I look at downloads every week and I think, I don't even have this many friends. I don't know this many people, but God is taking this little obedience, this stepping out of my comfort zone to talk into a microphone, and I don't even like hearing my voice recorded, but God is taking it and using it in these women's stories to touch lives, to impact people. And that is not because I am something great or any of us who on here are something great, but all of us have one thing in common, and that is a great God. And so as we wrap up this final interview episode of season 1, we've got one episode left. It's a wrap-up episode. We get to talk about some of the highs and lows from this first season. I just am praying over every single one of you as we head into the holiday season, that as we are taking this time to rest and kind of reset before season 2, that this will also be a season for you of rest and connecting with God and your people. And just know that even though Mondays we may not be releasing episodes, you will continue to be in our thoughts and prayers. And we love every single one of you and could not do this podcast without you. So thank you for listening. Thank you for all of you who have been sharing this. And we look forward to what the season ahead holds. But for now, we want to encourage you again, wherever you are and whoever you are, that you will continue to run your race in your place, exactly where God has you. Keep being awesome for Him. Bye, guys.